This is my presentation on Hiram Revels. Hiram Revels was born as a free man in Fayetteville, North Carolina. He was born to biracial parents. His mom was Scottish and his father was black. During his early life, it was illegal for African Americans to be educated in North Carolina, so he went to a school for blacks up in the north called the Dark Country Seminary. During his time at school, he worked as a barber. In 1845, Revels was ordained in the AME Church. His first job as a pastor was in Indiana, where he was elected to the AME Indiana Conference in 1849. Revels traveled throughout the country preaching in Indiana, Illinois, Kansas, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Missouri. Although it was illegal for free blacks to live in Missouri in fear for uprising, he did it anyway and took a job as a pastor in St. Louis. Revels once stated, "I sedulously refrained from doing anything that would incite slaves to run away from their masters," he recalled, "it being understood that my object was to preach the gospel to them and improve their moral and spiritual condition. Even slaveholders were tolerant of me." He was basically saying that he didn't stand for uprising and rebellion, but all he wanted to do was to preach the gospel to them and improve their inner and outer thoughts. Even though he tried to maintain peace, he was sent to jail for preaching. From 1855 to 1857, Hiram Revels was the principal of a black school in Baltimore, and on occasion he attended Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, on a scholarship. He was one of the few black men in the United States with at least some college education. When the Civil War began, he helped recruit 2 black regiments in Maryland. When black soldiers were given the permission to fight in 1862, he served as a chaplain for 2 black regiments in Vicksburg and Jackson, Mississippi. In 1863, Revels returned to St. Louis, where he established a freedmen's school. After that, Revels served in a church in Leavenworth, Kansas. Revels served in churches in Louisville, Kentucky, and New Orleans, Louisiana, before settling in Natchez, Mississippi in 1866. Revels became interested in politics from his education background. He took his first position as Natchez alderman. He soon entered politics but feared racial arguments over his religious work. But he quickly changed the opinions of everybody with his oratorical skills. In 1869, he was encouraged to run for the Senate by John Roy Lynch. He ended up winning a seat in the Mississippi Senate. Under the newly created Reconstruction government, Revels was one of the many 30 African Americans among the state's 140 legislators. The primary task of the newly elected state Senate was to fill the U.S. Senate seats. In 1870, the new Mississippi state legislature wished to elect a black man to fill the remainder of one term. After 3 days and 7 ballots, on January 20th, 1870, the Mississippi State Legislature voted 85 to 15 to have Hiram Revels in Brown's former seat. Revels arrived in Washington at the end of January 1870, but could not present his credentials until Mississippi was readmitted to the United States on February 23rd. On the afternoon of February 25th, the Senate voted 48 to 8 to seat Revels. When he was sworn in, he received petitions from both black men and women from all states. Even though Revels' term only lasted 1 year, he pushed for equality. Revels supported bills to improve the developing infrastructure in Mississippi. He also argued for the integration of schools in Washington, D.C. Lastly, he pushed for the amnesty of the former Confederates. In his opinion, he stated, "I am in favor of removing the disabilities of those upon whom they are imposed in the South, just as fast as they give evidence of having become loyal and being loyal. If you can find one man in the South who gives evidence that he is a loyal man and gives that evidence in the fact that he has ceased to denounce the laws of Congress as unconstitutional, has ceased to oppose them and respects them and favors the carrying of them out, I am in favor of removing his disabilities." Revels was amongst the group of people who did not like the idea of legal separation of races, but he didn't see the idea of forced social mixing as necessary. He also pushed for black civil rights by less conventional means. Once he retired from the Senate, he was a president of Alcorn State College. It was the state's first college for African American students. He was dismissed from the Alcorn presidency in 1874 by Governor Ames, but returned to the position 2 years later. Revels retired from Alcorn in 1882.